Hello everybody and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today we say hello from Den Haag from the API conference, and I'm really happy that we do this in an actual physical space. I'm here with Filip Verloy from Noname Security. Hello Filip, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, and thanks to be part of my experiment of filming not just on the web but in a room together. So we've been here together for the last 2 days and we've been talking about APIs the whole time. You work as a technical evangelist at Noname Security. What brought you here? What are you talking about? What are you focusing on?
So I did a talk yesterday specifically around API security, which is our focal point, I guess, as Noname Security. So there's a lot of API usage, as you well know, sort of exploding API usage, and we want to make sure that security is not sort of an afterthought, but is part of, let's say, the early development lifecycle of APIs. So we're here to sort of evangelize the technology that we have, but also evangelize security best practices in general, which is kind of my role at the company as well. So I attend conferences, I do talks, I do interviews like these to sort of talk about API security.
And it's kind of interesting to look at the API space. I think in terms of security, it's almost a little bit like schizophrenic, right? On the one hand, you want to open up things more and more. On the other hand, of course, everything that you open up also is a risk. And we have all these predictions where Gartner is saying that 3 years from now, I think all the companies will be using 3 times as many external APIs or something like those things. How do you think the API space has evolved that maybe now we have to use slightly different practices from what we have used maybe a few years ago?
Yeah, I think, first of all, to your point, we have seen like a dramatic increase in API usage because as an IT, let's say, community, we've been very successful, right? So we've been driving digital transformation, we've come up with all of these cool new tools, mobile applications, all of that stuff. And at the back end of all of these technologies lie APIs. And there's this real, let's say, struggle between getting to market really, really quickly and at the same time trying to do that as securely as possible. And of course, like with anything in IT, everything keeps changing. So we had SOAP, now we are mainly using REST, let's say, especially from an API security perspective. You have GraphQL, you have gRPC. So we have to keep on top of all of these changes. So not only are there going to be a lot more APIs, there's also going to be a lot more different types of APIs, and I'm not talking about internal versus external, but just the type of APIs that are being used. And that is a real challenge from a security perspective to do that in a decent way to make sure that we're not exposing things that we don't want to expose as an organization.
And there's also, I think, sometimes just this issue of awareness. When you sometimes read about these security issues like the Peloton or the Polar things, right, where people, I would say, weren't even aware of the fact that they were creating APIs and putting APIs out there, and then they were doing nothing to secure them because for them it was not even an existing thing. So I think just creating awareness also is probably an important part of the overall picture. Now, I think like one of the important changes in APIs has been that we used to have like these big centralized architectures where you said all my APIs are exposed from here. And this has changed a fair bit. And how do you think this has affected the way how we have to think about security?
Yeah, so I think if you look at it from a security perspective, somebody with a security hat on, he or she will be, very positive towards centralizing stuff. Because if you centralize something, you can easily control it or more easily control it. But the reality is, I think the way that we develop applications and the way that backend services are built these days, it's more and more distributed. And you're also using more and more third-party APIs, and you're connecting potentially to things that you're not really 100% sure how they actually work and what type of capabilities they expose. So we now have to think through, and I think awareness, to your point, is a very good way to think about it, is we have to sort of rein that in a little bit and think through what are all of the things that we're connecting through from an API perspective and how should we go about securing that, which is a bit of a challenge, but if we sort of start early, then I think there's good potential that we can actually pull this off.
Because like you said, like the security probably instinct would be to say we have to go through the secure thing.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And then on the other hand, like me, I'm not specifically in the security place, right? And we preach a lot about decentralization because there are a lot of good things about decentralization, but security is probably not one of them. But I think that's the interesting kind of balance there that you have to strike, right? How can you use APIs in the way that the digital transformation story tells you you should use them, but how can you still do it in a secure way? And you are advocating for like a specific way of looking at different angles of this. What are these specific things that you are saying people should have like a closer look at?
Yeah, I think if you look at how can we sort of incorporate some of these best practices as early as possible, shift left is a real important pillar of the story. So we want to make sure that during the development of APIs, you start thinking about what does the security aspect look like. So there's a bunch of tooling, of course, out there that can be used to test these services before you're putting them into production. I mean, you can even look at fairly simple things like linting and so on, and making sure you're following like your organization's best practices when it comes to creating these services. But the idea is you want to test well-known security vulnerabilities before you're exposing your APIs externally, and that happens by incorporating it into the development lifecycle. What's important there, I think, is that if you talk to a developer and you explain, oh, we're going to make security part of your development process, they're probably going to say, well, you know, I don't want any additional roadblocks. I have to deliver features. I don't have to deliver security. That's your problem, actually. But it's not, right? It's everybody's problem. So you have to do this in a way where it's a very low barrier to entry. It just becomes part of the workflow, like it becomes part of the pipeline build, how they're rolling out their applications, and that's how we should think about it. So incorporate security testing early on, incorporate security best practices early on, as shift left, and then start from there. Then, you know, there's a lot of stuff already in production, right? So it's not that we're going to start from scratch, unfortunately. You mentioned well-known like breaches like Parler and so on. So things are already in production. And then the idea then becomes, can we have a look at what you're exposing right now? So what is sort of the posture management of those systems from a security perspective? Like what APIs are you exposing? Who has access to the APIs? How are they sort of changing over time? And can we already see misconfigurations at that level, which is fairly easy to do? And then the third pillar is really about runtime security. So look at API communication in real time, and that will allow us to hopefully go a bit deeper into the business logic of the application that you're exposing through APIs, because from a security perspective, it's really hard to figure out what is the service actually doing that you're exposing externally. It's sort of a black box from a security perspective. Like there's the request and there's the response, but how does the decision get made, what that response should look like? So it's about runtime security learning for each and every API, what that logic looks like. So establishing a baseline of normal behavior, and then trying to see if you can see deviations from that baseline of normal behavior over time. And that's a very good indication of, oh, I think somebody has figured out a way to misuse the business logic of the application to get maybe more access, or to, trick your application in exposing.
Or just trying
data.
out things, right? Like,
Exactly.
Would you say that is something right now that's kind of a term that's being used quite a bit, that's something that aligns with observability?
Yeah, definitely to a large extent. Like you have to sort of think about, what is happening in your system, what is happening on your network. So observability definitely is a good sort of angle towards that, and there's a lot of tooling being built around observability as well. So I think we can do, let's say future-wise, we can do a lot more. I'm really excited about technologies like eBPF, for example, giving us like super deep insight into potentially what is happening in a host, in a network. So technology-wise, the tooling is getting where we need it to be. It's just that from a people and process perspective, we have to incorporate that into our thinking.
Just out of curiosity, so from your experience, when you go to a, let's say, larger organization, I'm sure one of the things you're asking them is how many APIs do you have? What's the typical reaction? From my perspective, like oftentimes they say, oh, we don't quite know. Is that something that you hear as well? Or have you also encountered organizations saying like, here's a list and that list is complete and we're sure about that?
Yeah, we encounter both, right? So usually though, the question or the response to the question is, we don't really know. But sometimes the response is, oh, we have 10 APIs.
No.
And then you go in and you do your API discovery, and actually, no, you have 130 APIs. So yeah, it's not an easy question to answer. And of course, people already have a lot of API management capabilities and so on, which is what we want. That's what they should be doing. But there's, zombie APIs, there's shadow APIs, there's all of these development APIs that people tend to forget about over time. And these are like typically the path of least resistance when it comes to an attacker trying to misuse your application. So again, back to awareness, like how many APIs do you have is probably a good starting point to think about what is my security posture when it comes to API exposure.
So if I wanted to summarize kind of what you were telling us, and I hope I'm getting it right, it's like traditional API management still is an important thing, that you have like good runtime security in place, but it needs to be augmented by improving development practices so that you make sure that you actually have secure API, and it also needs to be augmented by some way of better figuring out which APIs do you actually have, including the unmanaged ones.
Correct, yeah, absolutely agree with that. And also like what type of data am I transporting over those APIs? So as a final thought, like think about how many APIs do I have? What type of data am I exchanging across those APIs? And am I exchanging it across a secure API? Like, do I even need to authenticate to this API to get data back? So it's actually fairly easy to start figuring out what your security posture is. All goes back to awareness, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I'm guessing for most organizations that will give them something to think about, and increasingly so with more and more APIs. Good friends once said, she said, APIs are popping up like mushrooms. I like that a lot.
Absolutely.
Everywhere, and you don't really know where, but they seem to be thriving. And I think we'll be seeing that for a couple more years. Filip, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
It was fun. It was also a lot of fun to actually talk to you here. I hope this will work out well in terms of my video production. I'm really curious about that, but thanks for that opportunity. Wishing you well for your travels. Where are you headed now?
So I'm doing a short stop in Antwerp, and then I'm flying to the UK. So
Oh, okay.
Always
I'm flying to the UK as well. Maybe we'll meet there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks everybody for watching. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, all the best. Bye.